This is Dr. DJ Robinson, and you are listening to the Spirit of Rochester, our Spirit Online, 24/7 gospel radio and music, the best internet radio station for gospel music all day, every day. Thank you for tuning in. Let's get started. Stronger, and your condition will be worse than it was before. And so, when people get angry, it's not the situation that's making them angry, but the feeling that they are entitled for things from others. They're entitled, they feel that you should be responsible for how they feel. Well, the thing about it is they want to control others, and as a result, they have no control over themselves, and so when they lose their wished for control over someone else, they just lose it and they get angry. And that can sometimes throw us, those of us who are have been conditioned to be, sweet, kind-hearted Christians, and we really want to be live peaceably with all men, and we really go to the extreme. When someone else displays their anger, we can really start to coddle back, but we have to learn how to stand firm. The first thing we need to learn is that the person who is angry uh, at you for setting boundaries is the one with the problem. That took a lot for me to learn, because I would always think that I was the problem. And so I would always get, and this is just me personally, I would always get into this place of apologizing for, you know, oh, I'm sorry, and I started, as I'm now getting into my midlife, I said, why am I being sorry for how I feel? My feelings are my responsibility, just like someone else's feelings are their responsibility. But don't we, as believers of God, have the right to remain in God's boundaries? That we should not be rolled over. We should not make ourselves welcome mats for other people's abuse. We have to maintain and establish some certain type of, limitations here. And so when I had to realize is that the person that's angry with me for establishing boundaries, especially the ones that God has already established according to his principles, they're the ones with the problem, right? And so if you do not realize this, you may think that you're the one with the problem. Maintaining your boundaries is good for other people. We talked a while back about respecting one another's no. If I can respect your no, and then I expect for them to respect my no. And sometimes it's hard, again, when we start to do the introspection, it's hard for us to say no to ourselves sometimes. So, um, you also must view anger realistically. Anger is only a feeling inside the other person. When you feel anger, it motivates you, or it should motivate you to take action. But the Bible says that, be angry, but sin not, which means it should not motivate you to go into places of, murder and deception and things of that nature. But when you feel anger, it's a sign that your boundaries are somehow either being violated or they have not been established. And so, what that anger for the other person is that they have a boundary that has not been established. They are operating outside of their own limitations and expecting other people to be responsible for their feelings, and they're feeling angry in that way. And so they have to take responsibility for their own feelings. And then that to try to quench their anger would only keep them from being able to get what God has for them. Sometimes you have to let people be angry because God is trying to do something and do a work in them. If we try to appease that work, then they'll never change. They may not ever get what they need. And so, a few since we're coming down to the end of this, we've said on these lines, don't rob other people of their struggle. They have to wrestle with God in their own way. We don't want to see people suffer, but the same way we had to struggle and battle and pray and cry and snot to get where we are in God, guess what? that person needs to do that too. They're going to have to fight face to face with God, come to terms with their own feelings. We can be there to give them tools and to help and be responsible to them, but we cannot be responsible for them. Okay? Everybody still with me so far? So good? Okay, good. All right. Third, let the anger be a cue for you to do something. People without boundaries respond automatically to the anger of others. They rescue, seek approval, or they get angry themselves. There is great power. Here it is, underline this. There is great power in inactivity. Oh my goodness. I had to underline that for myself because I am a very active person and I always want to solve the problem. But sometimes just allowing people to go through what they have to go through and just being still and trusting God. Now, it doesn't mean I sit back and watch someone just suffer and, drown. But at the same time, we have to learn in moderation when to step in. And this is where it takes prayer, it takes discernment to be able to know, God, should I step in at this time? But there is great power in inactivity. Do not let an out of control person be the cue for you to change your course. When you know that you are established and secure in God, you just have to let that person be angry and decide for yourself what you need to do for yourself. Okay. So if you're there, if you have the book, this is page 272. It's around the third paragraph down. So just put a little star or something right there so that you can so that you can get what you get, so that you can remember that's there. Fourth, make sure you have a support system in place. Again, this is why the women's groups, the men's groups, the church services, being able to talk these things out. You know that me personally, I ascribe a lot to Sigmund Freud's talking cure theory, that when we're able to talk these things through in a safe and brave environment, that we can get the support that we need. We can also get the encouragement and the correction sometimes that we need. So make sure that when you're going to establish these boundaries, you know there is going to be warfare. You're going to have a safe place to be strengthened in and to retreat to. And so to get what you need. So you have to make sure that your support systems are in place. If you're going to set some limits with a person, either in a relationship or anything, who has controlled you with anger before, you want to have some people in your support system, make a plan, know what you're going to say. Maybe sometimes you have to, what they say, spar, kind of role play it out, or find out, what if they say this? What should I say if they say that? These are some ways that you can start to get yourself prepared for it. And so when I used to work in telemarketing a long time, we used to have scripts. Oh my gosh, we used to have scripts that would come out. And so they would say, well, if the person says no, you say this. And if they say they don't want to buy it, then you say, yeah, well, I understand you don't want to buy it today, but what I'm willing to do for you. And so we would have these rebuttal statements. And what you want to make sure that you have when you're doing these, when you're establishing boundaries, is that you have these rebuttal statements. And so the rebuttal statements often come in the way of scripture. They can come in the way of just self affirmations, knowing and owning your own feelings about things. And so these are some of the ways that you can deal with angry people. Fifth, do not allow the angry person to make you angry. And that is tough, especially if you haven't had any sleep. Especially if you haven't had any sleep, especially if you haven't eaten well, haven't been taking care of your body, especially if you've been stressing. It can be very easy to get triggered into anger. And sometimes this is when it seems like the most opportune time for the enemy to mess with us, or for us to get, off course, is when we are, have had either bouts of insomnia, if we've had any stress, if we've had any loss in the family, and we're already dealing with some things, that sometimes the last straw is for someone to come and push that button and try to infiltrate our boundaries, which causes us to be angry. This is why we have to stand firm. When you've done all that you can to stand firm then. And so he says that fifth, keep a loving stance while speaking the truth in love. When we get caught up in the eye for an eye mentality, and you can get in those really bad arguments sometimes with people. Well, you said this, and I said this because you said this, and you did this, but I did this, and you didn't do more than me, and I didn't do more than you, and you didn't do less than me, and I did. When you get into that tit for tat, it turns into a very bad spiral. What we have to do is we have to maintain our love, maintain our loving stance. Again, remember that armor of God, standing in your peace, right? Some people say stand in peace, standing in your peace, knowing that God has your back, that you won't even have to throw a blow, but you do have to stand in your peace. And so you take that peaceful, loving stance, speak the truth, right? Your truth in love. And when we get caught up in the eye for eye mentality of the law, or the returning evil for evil mentality of the world, we throw ourselves into bondage. But if we have boundaries, we will be separate enough to love, knowing that the problem is not with me. The problem is this person is trying to get their boundaries established, and so I can't get angry, with them not having their boundaries established. I'm responsible to them. I'm not responsible for them, right? I'm responsible to love them. I'm responsible to speak my truth to them, but I'm not responsible for how they feel. All right. Sixth, be prepared to use physical distance if you need to, and other limits that enforce consequences. Now, this one was rough for me. I'm going to be honest with you, but it has gotten so much easier because remember, peace is a part of the territory that God has given you stewardship over. Peace belongs in your house, and God has given you a house and a yard and a fence and everything that comes with it, and you can do whatever you need to do with that which God has given you according to his purpose and plan for your life. So one day I had to just I turned off my phone. I told the person, listen, I love you. I'm sorry that you feel this way. I don't want to have the energy. I think I even said, I didn't even say that I didn't have the energy. I think I said something like, I don't want to have the energy to do this conversation with you. I don't want to do this. I don't want to disrespect you. I'm going to hang up the phone now, and when you figure out whatever you have to do, then we can talk. And it that took a lot for me because I risked losing a connection. But what am I really losing the connection to? Am I losing the connection to a person who does not have boundaries? Do I want to maintain a connection to a person who doesn't have boundaries? We have to ask ourselves this question. And so when I got to the place where I said, I don't want to do this with you, and I said it not really for them, but I think I said it more or less for myself. And that took some type of power. And because, I had learned and been cultivated in the church so well I have to be nice to everyone and I have to do this. But when I finally spoke my truth and I accepted the fact that I didn't have to do that, I didn't have to have that conversation, I was no way obligated. I was not responsible for that person's feelings, but I was responsible to them to tell them the truth. I'm responsible for protecting my own peace and my own feelings, for living out the life that God has called me to live out. When I hang up the phone, I turn my phone off and I didn't, and I think I even blocked the number or something I did so that I would not
Hey,
call.
people of
And
God, thank you so much for tuning in. If you'd like more information about upcoming events, please visit my website, drdjrobinson.com/events. Thank you so much for listening. Let's get back to our broadcast.
own feelings for living out the life that God has called me to live out. When I hang up the phone, I turn my phone off, and I didn't, and I think I even blocked the number or something I did so that I would not call. And because sometimes we get to a place where we got a ton of stuff to say, like 15 minutes later, We're like, oh, I should have said that. And I should have told it. I'm going to call right now and I'm going to text. I blocked it so that I could not text. I blocked it so that I could not call. I blocked it so that I could not see a response or hear another thing. And peace. It took a little while now. Just let me tell you, when you first start doing this, it takes a little while. And then I started to think to myself, am I being rude? Oh, I shouldn't have done that. Oh, I should. But when I started to say, hey, listen, I got to get some rest. And maybe when I started to realize in that God has to deal with this other person, I cannot save this person. I am not God. That is my limitation. That is my boundary. I cannot do for this person what God can do for this person, right? They have to work out their own soul salvation. And then I prayed. Now, here's the prayer that I'll give you that I said to myself. I said, God, now if I'm wrong, show me that I'm wrong and give me the humility to apologize. Right? But if that other person is in the wrong, dear God, show them their wrong and give them the humility. And here's the other part to that, people of God. And if they never apologize to me, right? Let me be okay with that. The same way that God will show you your enemies and make your enemies your footstool, God will also show you how your silence and how your prayers have worked in someone else's life as well. And I'm a firm believer of that. Sometimes you have to leave people to work out their own soul salvation. And that's
Yeah, I think,
yeah, go
I
ahead.
agree.
Mm-hmm.
I agree, but there's so there's always a way to do everything,
Right.
so that we're not being offensive when we're creating and establishing our boundaries.
Right.
You know, even when a person has some resistance towards the boundary that's being set before them with you,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, and they say something or whatever, show forth some type of anger, which is not indignation. Um, then we just have to tell that individual, well, I'm sorry you feel that way, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and that's empathizing with them, but at the same time, still standing on your boundary. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You're not being offensive towards them. You're showing, you're letting them see that you do understand that, this may not settle well with them,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, I'm not moving, away from the boundary that I'm creating.
Right. Right.
Right.
Right. And yeah, I agree with that 100%. And I feel like I have my dog needs to eat. I'm so sorry, y'all. But I am at a place now too, as to where I used to say, and not to I'm very careful now when I say I'm sorry, because when we read later on in this chapter, it dawned on me as I was researching, and I'm so glad that you brought that up. It dawned on me that our choice of words have power. And so what I'm doing now is I'm saying, I can see your perspective and your point of view. And I can understand why you would feel that way. And that kind of keeps. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Right?
Right.
Not on you.
That's keeping me from being responsible for their feelings, because I have to maintain my boundaries and my sanity and my peace. And, so I can understand how that could make you feel. And like you said, Pastor, there's a certain type of tactfulness we have to train ourselves to have, because I'm gonna tell you honestly, I would say that, I would even say that statement real nasty. I'm like, well, look, I'm sorry you feel like that. You know what I'm saying? Then it turned into a whole nother thing, and you're like, oh my God, now we arguing about this part, right? So I agree with the pastor. There's a certain way that we can do things to not intentionally cause injury to others, right? At the same time, however, we want to protect, yeah, we want to maintain our own boundaries and remember that the anger, if someone is angry, because when we get angry, it is an indication that we have a boundary problem. So if the other person is angry, that's really the indication for them that they have a boundary problem. And again, agreeing with the pastor saying we have to find tactful strategies of how to express our boundaries without creating or kind of like smearing the mud on the wall, right? So without creating or perpetuating the instance, and kind of like planning our exit strategy. So now I try to use words like, I can understand your perspective, you know. At the same time, however, I'm still not going to have this conversation, you know. And so they're like, oh, well, yeah, you going to listen to me? No, no, no. You know, I don't have to.
But if I may,
Sure, come on.
But then you'll have those times where you don't understand their perspective. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But you still have to still handle it with love in your response.
Yeah.
Your response still should be, because you have to be sympathetic or empathetic to their own boundaries, even when you don't understand where they're coming from.
Okay.
Right. To say that you're sorry that you feel that way, right? It's not an indication or an admitting that you're at fault, or you're taking responsibility for something that's negative or wrong. It's not doing that. It's just doing it so that the person will not take an offense, but yet you're still standing on your truth.
Can I ask a question then?
Yep.
If a person, all right, so if a person is offended by anything anyway, can we really control their level of offense?
You can. You can't. So like how you just said, I could say, hey, I'm sorry. It's how you said it. I remember I was at my mom's house,
Mm-hmm.
and she asked me something. I can't remember what it was, but she asked me something, and I answered her question, and she got real quiet. And
Mm-hmm.
I looked at her and said, "Mom, what's wrong with you?"
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "I said, yeah." I said, "Why are you quiet?" She said, "You hurt my feelings." I said, "I hurt your feelings?" No, I'm crazy about my mom.
Right.
And that just, I'm like, "What, Mom? How did I hurt your feelings?"
Right.
I said, "I ain't do anything. How did I hurt your feelings?" And she said, "Well, what you said." I said, "Ma, all I said was such, such, such." She said, "Son, it's not what you said, it's how you said it."
Right.
And I said, "Nah, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I just thought I was just talking normal,
Mm-hmm.
but in the moment, how I said what I said hurt her feelings. And I had to apologize
Mm-hmm.
for not what I said, but how I said it.
But how you said it.
Offended her.
Right.
Yeah, because it actually offended her. And it hurt her feelings. So even in how we express
Right.
what we say, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It can still be hurtful.
Right.
It can still be hurtful.
And I get that much. I get that. And I agree that is something that we should be mindful. However, we do have to keep in mind that we are still not responsible for how someone we can say some of the most beautifulest things and package it so well, and anyone who still chooses to be offended is going to be offended at our boundaries, because remember, with this particular section, and I respect everything that you said, with this particular section, we're talking about people who get angry because we are not succumbing to being responsible for them and for how they feel. We have to guard against that, about making ourselves become responsible for how someone else feels, and because their feelings are their own. And so that's why I said the change that's happening in me, that may be happening in others as well, is that I'm starting to learn not to say, especially when I really am not, when I realize that if my feelings when I'm angry is something for me to work out with God, then I cannot allow myself to take responsibility in any way, shape, or form, especially when the boundaries are my boundaries. Let's take another example. When we started this chapter way early in the book, we talked about how um I think I told you all about this fence that I put in my backyard, and that the leaves would blow down and they would blow up against the house, and they would just blow and blow and blow and blow, and I would end up with piles and piles and piles of leaves from someone else's tree, right? Until I put up a fence and a boundary. And now what happens is all of those leaves get caught on the outside of the fence on the property of someone else, and and I'm not responsible for those leaves. It's up to me to put the boundary up and not be responsible for everything that blows into my yard. Now, if someone comes and they come into my yard and dump leaves on on my property, then that's a whole different, situation we have to deal with. The analogy of what I'm trying to say is that we can't allow ourselves to become solely responsible for other people's feelings. We do have to have some tactfulness, right? We can consider that this may hurt them. But again, as we talked about in another chapter, is what we're going to say going to harm them? It may hurt. Remember, we had the analogy about the dentist, right? We eat up the sweets. It feels good. It goes down really nice. It didn't hurt them, but in the long run, when you end up with cavities and diabetes, it will harm you. But the pain of having of either sacrificing that chocolate cake in the middle of the night, or the pain of getting your tooth fixed or something of that nature, it may hurt you, but in the long run it will not harm you. So we have to, I think what you're pointing to, Pastor, and to excel as well, is that what we have to be mindful of what we say. Is it going to hurt or is it going to harm? Because what I'm learning is that people who have an offended stance, who have a lack of boundaries, who are angry at you. Now, mind you, remember, we're talking about angry because you have established your own boundaries and you're not being responsible for their whatever they want you to be responsible for. When you establish your own boundaries, those people are going to be offended regardless to how you say it, how many times you say it, whatever tactful way you say it, because the problem is not you. It's them. They have to work out something with God, in fact, with their either response, knowing where their responsibilities are, or lack of. Okay. When I'm angry with something, now I'm starting to do a little bit more, and this is just me being a little transparent as I've been reading this book. I'm more or less now on the internal boundaries of not being, I'm more angry with myself for not having boundaries in certain areas and trying to establish them than I am now with other people, because I'm realizing that everyone deserves the same grace.
Thank you so much for tuning into this broadcast. If you'd like to get access to more content, remember to visit my website to listen to podcast archives and videos. You can find them at drdjrobinson.com/broadcast. Thanks again for tuning in. I pray that you have strength in your body, wisdom for your mind, and peace in your soul. May God be with you until we meet again.